I'm going to introduce Reverend Dr. Peggy Price. An inspirational leader and minister in the New Thought movement, Dr. Peggy was called in 2006 to the Seal Beach Center for Spiritual Living, where she has served for the past 6 years, choosing to rewire at the end of May 2011 in order to have more time and travel with her husband, Don. See, we both have Dons for husband. And to pursue her passion of interfaith peace building. She has traveled extensively on behalf of that interfaith work. She is a founding member and past president of the Greater Huntington Beach Interfaith Council, serves on the Interfaith and Intercultural Competency Committee of UC Irvine, and is a member of the advisory board of SARA, Spiritual Alliance for Religion and Hope. And it is also the name of her granddaughter that just graduated on Saturday here at Chico State, which is one of, which is one of the reasons why we planned this months ago. It was like, when Sarah graduates, you come up and then you get to speak here. How many of you were here 3 years ago when Dr. Peggy was here and she gave the talk and we did dialogue circles for the first time? Well, for those, it seems like there's not as many. You're in for a treat. She is currently working on a project to make Huntington Beach a city of compassion. And if she's in charge, that'll happen. Actively retired, she speaks at various centers and venues, facilitates retreats and workshops across the United States, and continues to teach, lead, and serve at the Seal Beach Center for Spiritual Living. And she has also remained not only a friend and colleague to me, but she has been serving in that capacity for our center when the occasion arose. So I want you to join me in a very, very warm welcome for Reverend Dr. Peggy Price.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you. Thank you very much. Reverend Duchess and I met when we were both in ministerial school, and we were doing an exercise that was being led by Dr. Roger Teal, who's now the senior minister at Mile High Church in Denver, which I believe now is the largest of all of our churches. And we had the opportunity to share our stories. And we found out that we were just sisters with different mothers and fathers. We had many things in common, including a theatrical background and being Leos and a few other things. Those were just some of the minor ones. And as Reverend Duchess said, we were in the stadium yesterday to watch the graduates walk, and my granddaughter Sarah was a communications major, so she got her degree yesterday. So we're very proud of her. Yeah. I invited her and her boyfriend to be here this morning, but I think they partied late last night. So we forgive her. It's okay. She's heard me before. But when Duchess was telling me that your theme for right now is telling our stories and all about stories, I thought, well, that's all about life. I mean, that's what we are. Our lives are our stories. Isn't that right? Isn't that true? And so when I was sitting in her office, I saw this little thing on the wall, this wall hanging by an artist whose name just...
Kelly Ray Roberts.
Kelly Ray Roberts, yes. I have some of her pieces too. And on this little image has this message: tell your story, believe in healing, honor your intuition, take the journey back to yourself, wear more skirts. Okay, guys, wear more shorts. Begin today. Begin today. I like that, and I thought, shucks, I like that better than the opening I had, for sure. But it's very true. It's because your story is your journey back to yourself. I think we all have stories that were part of our journey back to ourselves. Is that not true for you? And I know it is for me, that some of the stories that I have experienced in my life were the stories that were part of my transformative journey. Those moments of realizing who I was or who I was not, and making that turn and making that change. I picked the title, My View from the Train, because last Saturday, a week ago Saturday, I took the metro from Long Beach into Los Angeles, which is a whole lot easier than driving and parking. And I have a daughter who lives in Hollywood, and she met me in Chinatown, and we had an early Mother's Day. We just both loved Chinese food and wandered around and ate noodles and ate all kinds of little Chinese pastries and looked in the shops and windows and talked a lot. And then I got back on the train. It was very easy. But the train and urban life offers one many, many opportunities for observation of humanity, right? Go to an airport, get on a train, get on a bus, get into a place where you're with all kinds of people, and you get to expand your curiosity. You're out of your own normal and into another kind of realm and world. And the train from Long Beach to LA goes right through South Central. So I have all of humanity getting on and off of that train, and languages and cultures and even smells, because I don't know what the man ate next to me, but it was pungent. And I've done that all over the world, and that's part of why I think I like traveling as much as I do, is because people are fascinating just to watch them. And so as I enjoyed my time with my daughter, I also enjoyed watching the people on the train. And the car that I was in was full, and I was grateful to have a seat. And seated in front of me was a young African-American woman, and she had her iPhone, and she had it on speaker. And when she first put the iPhone up to her ear, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to be hearing? A metaphysical message about how she was created out of star stuff and how she was part of the universe and divine and beautiful and wonderful. And I'm going, could I have picked a better place to sit? And gosh, what's that young woman's story? Well, how did she find her way to this wonderful message, this positive message that she was listening to but sharing with me too? And I thought, there's an interesting story there, but I won't ever get to know it. But she has a story. She has a story. And then a young man got on the train who was a little person. He was Hispanic. He was probably 25 to 30 years old. And he sat down diagonally across from me in one of the sideways seats where I could look at him. And I looked at him, and I thought, this must be a challenging life for a young Hispanic man, to be small and to have this physical, manifestation of his form in a culture that so values machismo and strength and being big. And there was something about his face that told me that he had experienced some sadness and difficulty, but also that he was compassionate. There was something about him. Well, my young woman with the metaphysical message got up and off, and he sat in front of me. And so the train was, the train on Saturday had to be diverted because they were repairing a couple of stations. So we actually had to get off the train onto buses and be bused to another station and then get back on the train. It was kind of an interesting detour. And I hadn't really heard which station to get off at. So I turned to the man next to me who had had a very aromatic meal, and I asked him, do you know what the name of the station is? And he says, no habla inglés. And so this young man in front of me turns around to me and says, don't worry, I'll let you know, and you just follow me, and I'll show you. I thought, this man's life, whatever his story might be, has not turned him into someone who is cynical or sour or bitter. This is a gentle, compassionate soul. And I again thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could sit with him and hear his story? What's his story? Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. Sometimes coming home from, like this trip now, you'll see people out in the fields working. And sometimes we have some very negative vibes that go out in our society about the people that pick our crops. And yet every one of them has a story. My parents had a woman working for them for years who came from Guatemala. Her name is Annabella Ruano. Annabella came to this country from Guatemala when all of the violence was going on down there, where people were being killed, nuns were being slaughtered, and there were all kinds of, the drug cartels, and I don't really know all about it, political soldiers and so on. And as a young girl, she walked from Guatemala to the United States. Walked from Guatemala to the United States because she wanted to have a better life. And she came here, and she started to clean houses, and she began to assimilate into this culture. And she then met a man and had a baby. And when she had the baby, she wanted to get her papers. She wanted to stay in this country because this baby was born here. And so somehow she scraped together the money with cleaning houses to get herself back to Guatemala so she could get her birth certificates and whatever else she needed. And when she got down there, she got robbed. She had left the baby with her husband and his family, by the way, so where's the child? You might want to know that. She got robbed. So what did she do? She walked back. She walked back twice. She raised that child. The husband somewhere along the line disappeared. She worked for my mom and dad. She was their housekeeper for a number of years in Los Angeles. And when her daughter was 19 years old, her daughter walked out of a club one night with some of her friends, which she probably shouldn't have been in the club in the first place, but there she was. And a young man was out on the street who said something not very nice, and this girl sassed him back, and he shot her and killed her. Annabella, who came to this country to have a better life, to raise this child whom she adored, suddenly had this 19-year-old child gone, dead, forever. I went to the funeral. It was in a big, beautiful Catholic church in Hollywood, and her daughter is buried in the cemetery where all the movie stars are. And she stood in front of in that cathedral. The cathedral was full of people. Annabella had made friends everywhere. And she stood up in front of that cathedral and she said, "I want to thank you, Jesus, for the gift of my child for 19 years. Not a word about the violence that had happened to her daughter. Not a word about wanting to get revenge or hatred toward this person, but just gratitude for what she had." My father lived to be 100 years old, 100 years and 2 months old. He died in February. Annabella was at our funeral, at his funeral. This woman's story is so, and she also, by the way, got her mother here and takes care of her mother, who's now in her 90s. That's a story, one story of a person who so dreamed of what this country can offer that she went through what she went through in order to be here. Sometimes we don't realize those stories are the stories of many people who have that deep yearning to be a part of who we are and what we are. It's a powerful story. I wasn't even going to tell it, but it just came through and I thought I should. But it's the idea that in all of our lives, we have experiences that can define us, or we have experiences that can change us and transform us, or we have experiences that sometimes we use as the reason why we don't do better than we do, right? Arguing for our limitations, it's called. But it's when we allow the story that we have to transform us, to inform us, to truly change us in some way, that the story really has power. Those are the stories that we want to be telling to one another. There are also times when we have stories where we have to deal with those highs and lows of life, our losses, our sorrows, our disappointments, and also our great joys and our delights. But it's also when we pay attention to the stories of those around us, those with whom we connect, that we can really deeply involve ourselves in one another's lives, where we can really sense that feeling of oneness with one another. And we can bond together in so many different ways with our stories. I spend 2 days, probably almost full days a year, with a group of women. None of us willingly joined this group, but all of us are mothers who have lost children. And twice a year we get together, before Mother's Day and before the holidays. And we just had our gathering. Another woman and I co-facilitate this group together. And all we do is hear each other's stories. That's all we do. Because so many of us mothers who have lost children have found that it makes other people outside of us and those closest to us uncomfortable when we talk about our children that are gone. But we don't want our children to die. We want their stories to stay alive. And so we share with each other. Nobody says a word. We put a white alabaster heart in our hand. We hold our heart in our hand, which I think we shared here, and we just tell our story. And at the end of the day, we've shed a lot of tears. We've also laughed a lot because we've had funny stories to tell about our children. And we go away feeling better. And we go away knowing that we're not alone. And we go away knowing that we're not judged. And one of the things that I find interesting is how many of our children that come together, these 36 moms last time I counted, 27 of the moms that were there had sons who had died from drug or alcohol, effects of drugs or alcohol. And together, we learn to understand better. We learn to know each other better, but we also learn to understand our children better by hearing the stories. Simply listening. Simply listening. I've done hospice work in the past, and of course all of us ministers and practitioners do a lot of pastoral care. And you know, the rules about that are really very simple. When we go to visit someone who is either about to make a transition or is going through something challenging and is in the hospital or recovery, is simply show up, shut up, and listen. That's it, basically. Be a presence. Be there to hear. To be there to hear. To be heard is such a gift. It is such a gift to hear each other. So often we're so anxious to tell our own story that we don't really want to hear what the other person has to say. And yet it's through their stories that we really get to know who they are and where we can really deeply understand them. And it's not going to happen by Facebook or Instagram or Twitter that you're going to really get another person's true story. And so that gift of listening is really one of the greatest gifts that we can give. The other part about a story is oftentimes our story is framed around some kind of a problem or challenge or issue. And if you think of some of the greatest spiritual leaders in the world today, and especially inspirational leaders that we know, people like Oprah, people like the Dalai Lama, people like Wayne Dyer, all of them had a story. That is the story that changed them, that moved them to be who they are now. Oprah, with her early childhood experience of having been abused. Wayne Dyer having had being very poor as a child, and then later dealing with cancer. Dalai Lama, his whole culture being evicted from a country and being murdered, and yet here's this man who's so transformed that what does he teach us? Compassion and forgiveness. And so these stories can be so powerful, and those stories are within you also, and within me also. And so it's those things that allow us to grow and expand and change. Ernest Holmes says, sometimes our stories are about being in a challenging place. And Ernest Holmes says that the way out, if we're in trouble, is not through restriction, but through expansion. In other words, instead of looking in at our story or our problems, he used the word problem, but I'm going to say stories, as things difficult to solve, we can look upon every challenge as an added possibility and an added opportunity for self-expression. And so we can take some of these stories of the challenges that we've experienced, the problems we've experienced, some of these stories that we felt that we had to keep telling in order to excuse ourselves for whatever it was that we weren't getting done, and instead turn them around and give them the opportunity to expand us and grow us instead. When we stay stuck in our stories, then our stories keep us from risking. I had a really bad relationship, and so I'm never going to ever be in another relationship again. I'm just not going to do that. Keeping us from risking. Some of us use our stories to prove why we haven't succeeded in life. And yet it's those very same stories that can be the reason why we can succeed in life if we turn them around and step beyond our stories and transcend them and use them to rise above our circumstances. Dr. Peggy Bassett, who was my mentor many years ago, she was the minister at the Huntington Beach Church. Some of you may have heard of her. She's been gone for many years, but she was a very powerful speaker and leader, and because her name was Peggy, she inspired me to pick up the idea that maybe I could be a minister too. But she said, and I, by the way, later had the same pulpit in Huntington Beach. So she said, I will listen to your story just once, and then I don't want to ever hear it again. Well, that may sound a little crass, but I understand exactly what she meant, because our stories say something about how we got to where we are, but it's where we're going from there that really matters. It's about what we're going to do with that story, because our stories are really not so much about who we are, because our next choice or decision is really who we are. On my license plate outside, it says up to now, because the story is about up until now I have, and now I shall. It's about moving forward. Our stories are about us up until now. And what's next? What's next are these expanded possibilities and opportunities for growth. So if you tell me your story, or if you tell someone else your story, it's also important to tell them what you learned from it. What did you learn from it? Dr. Tom Costa, who was a minister in Palm Desert for many, many years, said that he believed that when we make our transition and we go to the pearly gates and we meet God, God's going to ask us 3 questions. How well did you love? What did you learn? And what did you give the world? Well, our stories are what carry us. How well did we love? What did we learn? What did we give the world? We do that through story. And those are wonderful questions to ask someone else as well. Make a good workshop, actually. So if you tell me your story, I want to know what you learned from it. We ministers get to hear a lot of stories. We get to hear a lot of them, practitioners too. And what I find is I'm so amazed at what members of our congregations have accomplished, the things that they have actually done in their lives, and how creative they are. I recently did a memorial for a friend I knew for many, many years. I had no idea that she was a teacher's aide at a local school. I had no idea that every year there were 2 or 3 kids in that classroom that she worked in who didn't have enough money for shoes or clothes or backpacks, and Judy provided all of them for them without ever a word. No one ever knew, but the teacher came and told us the story of Judy and the wonderful things that she had done for those kids. Sometimes our stories get told through other people who witness and observe what we do. Excuse me. On a grander scale, I see stories in an even more powerful way. I mentioned a little bit about how sometimes our view of immigrants is negative, rather than understanding the stories behind them. I was in Israel and Palestine a few years ago, and I traveled with an interfaith group, and we met on both sides of the barrier. We met with different peace organizations. We met with students. We met with educators. We met with people who are doing on-the-ground work. The things that you read about Israel and Palestine in the paper are the political things that you read about, and it looks, to me, it looks awful. But when you're on the ground, you get to see how God is really at work, how the power of compassion is really at work, how the power of story is really at work, and how young people, we sat at a lunch one day with a bunch of young students, and I was sitting with a couple of Palestinian girls, and I said to them, well, what are your dreams? What is it that you really want to do? And one of them said, I want to be a doctor. And she says, I want to be a doctor and I want to get married, but I want a man that's going to treat me like an equal. And it was just amazing to hear this young woman, because what do we hear about Palestine? Oh, the women are held down, the women are suppressed, there's no opportunities there. Well, she had dreams and visions and goals. We met with a rabbi who's from the Galilee area. The rabbi said that when he first came over there, he brought his children from Michigan because he wanted them to become more in touch with their Jewish background and the Jewish experience. But he was an educator, and he said, I wanted to start a school that had both Palestinian and Israeli kids. He said, I found out that was impossible. There were just way too many things that got in the way politically. I couldn't do it. He said, but I found another way. He said, I started gathering these kids together after school and coming from the different schools, and I taught them circus acts, trapeze artists, tumblers, clowns. We had our, pretend animals that we trained and tamed. And he said, this program has grown so much that now we go and cross the checkpoints all the time, and kids are clamoring to get into the program. Why? Because they're learning about each other's stories, and they're learning to cooperate and work together rather than look at what the other might be. They discover there is no other, that they're just like me. That's the power of story. Can you imagine if we could get more people who look at each other as the other to sit down and just hear their stories? How much more connected as a world we could be. That's the power of story. That's what builds the strength of and the fabric of a community, is to begin to know their stories, to begin to know what works. Our project in Huntington Beach is part of an international project called Cities of Compassion, based on the Charter for Compassion, which was created by Karen Armstrong after she won the TED Prize in 2008. And she said that she felt that if we could get the golden rule back out into our cultures again, that we would have a much better world, which I agree, don't you? And so she gathered together some of the greatest religious leaders on the planet, and they created this Charter for Compassion. Well, the city of Seattle saw that and said, we want to be a compassionate city. And so they were the first city to become one in 2010. In 2013, Huntington Beach signed the Charter of Compassion. Our city council signed that charter. Huntington Beach is the first city in Orange County to become a city of compassion. And what has happened is now we have a homeless collaboration and coalition going on, where all of the different agencies that didn't know what the other one was doing have come together, and they're beginning to work together. We're hearing each other's stories. We're learning about each other. We just had a day of service in our community. We mobilized over 1,000 people to go out and do all kinds of things all over the city. We have, in September, we join with all of the other cities around the world that are participating. Cities like Tel Aviv, cities like Belfast, and then Seattle and Louisville and Milwaukee, a lot of American cities as well. We go into co-opetition with each other to see who can do the most acts of service, the most acts of kindness within that given period, September 11 to September 21. Last year was our first year to play the Compassion Games. We came in 4th, Huntington Beach. Our goal, we have a 200,000 population. That's darn good when you're up against cities like Seattle. They won. But our goal this year is to be number 1. But when we work together like that, we hear each other's stories. We stand next to somebody that we might not ever talk to otherwise, and we learn, oh my gosh, we have so much in common. That's how we learn. That's what interfaith is so important. That's why it matters so much that we go out and speak and learn about people that are different than we are, because we always find out the same thing at the core. Our hearts, our desires, our yearnings, the things we value are so much the same. It's just all the outer trappings that get in the way. And so I invite you to go this week and find someone new that you've never met before and sit them down and begin to take the time to ask them about their story, to tell me about yourself. What excites you? What delights you? What does your heart yearn for? What is it that you still haven't done that you want to do? What's on your bucket list? There are lots of open-ended, wonderful questions you can ask that person and begin to learn about them. And as you do, you will find that heart connection. You will find that place of commonality. It even works with people that you don't like very well. In fact, it's quite transformative when you actually sit down with someone that maybe you don't like so well and have them tell you their story. Alice in Wonderland says, life just gets curiouser and curiouser. And I just encourage you to take that curiosity with you and be willing to be the listener, to hear what the other has to say and to hear their story. Because in that story, you will discover something about yourself. Thank you.